Why did no one look at her when she walked into the briefing room? The chairs scraped, boots shifted, voices filled the air like static, but around her there was a strange absence, like she was standing in a different room altogether. Claire Evans took her seat near the wall, notebook already open, pen resting lightly between her fingers. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Rushing drew attention, and attention had never been kind. Across the table someone snorted, a quiet sound, deliberate. "Dead weight," a voice muttered, not even trying to hide it. She heard it, of course she did. She always heard everything. Claire kept her eyes down, tracing the edge of the paper as if the words were just part of the room's background noise, like the hum of the generator or the wind slipping through the canvas walls. But something tightened behind her ribs anyway. Not pain, not anger, just the familiar pressure of being measured and dismissed. This was supposed to be training, supposed to be neutral ground. It never was. From the first day she didn't fit the picture they wanted. Too small, too quiet, too careful. She wore her uniform like it was borrowed, sleeves just a fraction loose, name tape slightly crooked, boots always cleaned a second longer than necessary. She didn't boast, didn't trade stories, didn't talk about what she'd done or where she'd been. To them, silence meant weakness. They called her a paper soldier. Someone who could pass exams but fold under pressure. Someone good at maps and memos, not mud and blood. The nickname spread fast, sticking to her like dust. Claire never corrected them. Correcting people required energy, and energy was something she guarded closely. During drills, they put her on the edges. Observation roles, support tasks. "Just watch," they'd say. "Don't slow the team down." She watched. She always watched, and she remembered everything. The first time someone grabbed her wrist, it happened casually, almost playfully. A joke, they said later. One of the guys leaned too close, smirking, fingers closing around her sleeve. "Let's see," he laughed. "Any chalk dust under there, Professor?" Claire froze. Just for a breath. Her pulse jumped, sharp and sudden, like her body had remembered something her mind tried hard to forget. The glove slipped back an inch, not enough to be obvious, enough to change the air. The laughter died first. Then the room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like someone had pulled the sound out of it. Eyes dropped to her wrist. 3 faint numbers, old, scarred, not written, not inked, carved. Someone exhaled slowly, too slowly. A nearby officer's face shifted, color draining in a way Claire recognized instantly. Recognition always came like that, delayed, unwilling, heavy. Someone started, then stopped. Claire pulled her glove back into place, movements controlled, precise. Her face gave nothing away. It never did. Whatever that moment meant to them, it wasn't meant for her. Not yet. Training pushed on, brutal and unrelenting. Long runs before dawn. Exercises designed to confuse more than test. Orders barked without explanation. Criticism delivered like verdicts. Claire lagged behind on endurance runs, lungs burning, legs trembling, not because she was weak, but because she paced herself differently. She always had. They laughed anyway. Every stumble became proof. Every quiet moment became suspicion. During inspections, someone kicked her pack by accident. During meals, they mocked her for eating too little or too neatly. When she spoke, they talked over her. When she stayed silent, they called her strange. What they never saw was how carefully she mapped the terrain in her mind. How she noted blind angles, wind shifts, the way sound carried across the valley at night. How she stayed awake when others slept, listening, counting, remembering. She wrote everything down. During one-night exercise, smoke thickened the air, visibility dropped to nothing. Orders tangled. Someone panicked. Claire didn't. She moved where she was told to stay, quietly repositioning a rear element without being asked. The next morning, the drill report showed 0 casualties where there should have been 4. No one thanked her. An instructor circled something on a map and said nothing. That was enough. The cruelty sharpened as the weeks went on. Not loud, not obvious, just constant, like pressure applied slowly meant to wear her down. During a trust drill, someone stepped aside too late. Claire hit the ground hard, breath knocked from her chest, stars bursting behind her eyes. Laughter rippled, nervous and cruel. She stood up anyway. Dust clung to her uniform. Blood tasted faintly metallic in her mouth. She brushed herself off and went back to her place without a word. Inside, something cracked, not broken, just shifted. Pain had a way of clarifying things. That night alone, she sat with her back against a crate, cleaning her boots by lantern light. Her hands were steady, always steady. She traced the seam of the leather like it was a ritual, grounding herself in something solid, something real. They don't know, she thought. And maybe they never would. At the range, when heavier weapons came out, someone laughed openly. She was too small, they said. The rifle was almost as tall as she was when she lifted it. Claire adjusted her stance, breathed once, slow and deep. The world narrowed. 5 shots. 5 hits. Clean, exact, unquestionable. No celebration, no reaction, just silence, the kind that comes when something doesn't fit the story people have already decided to tell themselves. She set the weapon down and stepped back like it meant nothing. Inside, her heart hammered, not with pride, with memory. Later, around the fire, the jokes came back, quieter now, edged with unease. Someone mentioned her wrist again, reached without thinking, grabbed. This time she pulled away fast. Too fast. The numbers showed fully, just for a second, long enough. A senior officer stopped mid-step, stared. His voice dropped when he spoke, like volume itself had learned respect. "The Shadow Brigade," he said softly. "I thought you were dead." Claire said nothing. She never corrected ghosts. That night she lay awake listening to the camp breathe around her. Somewhere, someone whispered her name differently now. Not kinder, just cautious. She stared at the dark canvas above her, fingers curled loosely near her wrist, where old scars pressed into skin like a quiet record of things survived. She felt tired, bone-deep tired, but not defeated, because she knew something they didn't. Strength didn't announce itself. It waited. And when it finally moved, it didn't need permission. Why did the room feel colder after they learned her name meant something? No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The shift, the hesitation. Claire noticed it in the way voices softened when she passed, in how jokes stopped mid-sentence, in how eyes flicked toward her wrist and then away again, as if looking too long might invite something dangerous. Fear didn't look like shouting or anger. It looked like restraint. The next morning, training resumed as if nothing had happened. Same schedules, same drills, same dust clinging to boots and lungs, but the ease with which they dismissed her was gone, replaced by something uncertain. Suspicion, maybe, or guilt. Neither made her safer. Claire preferred the old cruelty. At least it was honest. During a navigation exercise, the team was split into smaller units and sent into uneven terrain, radios deliberately limited. Claire was placed at the rear again. Support. Observe. Don't interfere unless asked. She accepted the role without comment, falling into step behind them, counting paces, tracking the sun's angle through the haze. Halfway through, she noticed the mistake. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a small misalignment between the map and the land itself. A ridge that should have dipped instead of risen. A creek bed too dry for the season. Claire slowed, recalculating quietly. Her pulse quickened. The route they were taking funneled straight into a narrow choke point. If this were real, if someone were waiting. She hesitated. Speaking up had never gone well. But staying silent felt heavier. "You're off by 2 degrees, she said finally, voice calm, barely raised. The team stopped. Someone laughed, someone sighed. The leader turned, irritation flashing across his face like a spark. "We're fine," he snapped. "Keep moving." Claire held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. There was no challenge in her eyes, just certainty. She stepped back, letting them pass, but her jaw tightened as they moved ahead without her. 10 minutes later, the whistle blew. Exercise halted. An instructor stormed down the slope, face tight with barely contained anger. The route had been flagged. In a real scenario, it would have ended badly. Very badly. No one looked at Claire. But no one laughed either. That night sleep came slow. Claire lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories she rarely let surface. Dust wasn't so different from sand. Orders shouted here sounded too much like orders shouted elsewhere. Sometimes the smell of oil or sweat pulled her back years in an instant, heart racing, breath shallow. She rolled onto her side, pressing her wrist against the mattress until the scars ached. Pain anchored her, reminded her where she was. And where she wasn't anymore. The interrogation drill came without warning. They called it stress inoculation, a controlled environment, safe, necessary. Claire had done worse under far less forgiving conditions, but something about the way they assigned roles made her uneasy. She was designated the detainee, blindfolded, hands restrained, seated under harsh lights that turned the air thick and heavy. The team surrounded her. At first it followed protocol, raised voices, questions, pressure, but lines blurred quickly. Old resentment seeped in thick and personal, accusations sharpened, insults turned intimate. "What are you hiding?" someone demanded. "Who did you sleep with to get here?" They laughed when she didn't answer, laughed harder when she stayed still. Someone yanked her head back by the hair. Cold water splashed across her face. Claire flinched despite herself, breath hitching before she forced it steady again. Inside, she counted. Breath, heartbeats, seconds. This wasn't new, just unexpected here. "You're nothing," a voice said close to her ear. "Dead weight, say it." Something flickered inside her then. Not anger, not fear, something quieter, older. "Enough," she said. One word. The room stilled. Not because she shouted, because she didn't have to. The drill ended shortly after. Officially, it was deemed excessive. Unofficially, no one met her eyes as they removed the restraints. Claire flexed her fingers slowly, feeling circulation return, grounding herself in the present. That night she sat alone again, cleaning equipment that didn't need cleaning. A habit, a ritual. Across the fire, laughter tried to return, thin and strained. Someone mentioned her mark again. No one reached this time. Good. Days passed. Tension lingered like humidity before a storm. Then came the communications exercise. Radios failed. Signals jammed. Confusion spread fast. Voices overlapped, urgent and panicked. Claire had been monitoring a secondary frequency no one else bothered with. She adjusted the dial, listening past the noise, fingers moving with quiet precision. She spoke once. Soft, clear, measured. A coded sequence, old, almost forgotten. The static cleared. Coordinates came through. The exercise ended in success. Later an envelope appeared on her cot. No note, just a folded commendation inside, official, signed. She stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it away without expression. Recognition wasn't what she wanted. Understanding was. The combat showcase loomed, a high-profile evaluation. Names were posted. Claire wasn't among them. No explanation, no appeal. She stood in formation as the list was read, spine straight, hands clasped behind her back. Around her, some smirked. Others looked uncomfortable. Claire felt the familiar pressure again, settling behind her ribs. Ignored again. That night she packed her gear carefully, folding each item with practiced efficiency. She didn't know if she'd be staying. Didn't ask. Somewhere deep down, she'd learned long ago not to expect fairness. Morning came with the sound of engines. A black vehicle rolled into camp, dust swirling in its wake. Conversations died instantly. A colonel stepped out, presence heavy enough to bend the air around him. His eyes scanned the group once. "Where Evans?" he asked. Silence. Claire stepped forward. "We need her," he said simply. "Now." No explanations were offered. None were needed. She followed him without looking back, heart steady, mind already shifting gears. As they walked away, she felt eyes on her, not mocking now, not dismissive. Watching. Later, as she waited for transport, an officer handed her a folder. Inside were pages she hadn't seen in years, reports stamped and sealed, photos grainy and dark, names she carried quietly always. She closed it gently. Some stories weren't meant to be shared. As she left the camp behind, Claire didn't feel triumph, didn't feel relief, just a quiet resolve settling deeper into her bones. Whatever came next would demand everything she had. She was ready. Because dignity didn't come from being believed. It came from continuing, even when no one was watching. Why did the silence follow her longer than the doubt ever had? The vehicle carried her away from the camp without ceremony. No farewell, no applause, just dust curling in the side mirrors as the valley shrank behind them. Claire sat still, hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes forward. The folder rested against her thigh like it weighed more than paper should. She hadn't opened it again. She didn't need to. Some memories stayed sharp whether you invited them back or not. The colonel didn't speak for a long time. He watched the road, jaw tight, as if rehearsing words he wasn't sure he wanted to say. Claire let the silence stretch. Silence was honest. It didn't pretend. "They shouldn't have put you there," he said finally. Not apologetic, just factual. "They didn't know," she replied. He glanced at her then, studied her face like it was a map with too many erased lines. Some of them knew enough. Claire looked away. Knowledge didn't always lead to kindness. Sometimes it only sharpened cruelty. They reached the forward training site by dusk. Smaller, quieter, fewer people. The kind of place built for work that didn't make headlines. She was issued temporary quarters and told to rest. Tomorrow would be long. That night's sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of wind over open ground, of breath held too long, of numbers etched deeper than skin. She woke before dawn, heart steady, mind already alert. Habit. Survival didn't turn off just because the war did. The sniper qualification drill was clinical, controlled, observed by men and women who knew exactly what they were looking for. No jokes, no smirks, just measured glances and clipped instructions. Claire preferred it this way. She moved through the course methodically, adjusted for wind, waited when others rushed, passed shots she knew wouldn't count, took the ones that mattered. Her breathing slowed until the world narrowed to reticle and rhythm. Each hit landed clean. Not spectacular, precise. When it ended, no one clapped. The colonel nodded once. A quiet affirmation, enough. Between evaluations, Claire sat alone, reviewing notes she'd made during the exercise. Even now, she found flaws. Places, systems could be better. People could be safer. Improvement never stopped. It was how she stayed ahead of regret. A junior officer approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," he began, then stopped, unsure. "They said you redesigned the extraction protocol overseas." She looked up, parts of it. He swallowed. "That protocol saved my brother." Claire held his gaze. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, not pride, not sorrow, just acknowledgement. "I'm glad he made it home." The officer nodded, visibly steadier, and walked away. Claire exhaled slowly. Moments like that always landed heavier than medals ever had. Days passed in focused intensity. Briefings, simulations, reviews. Claire spoke more here, but never more than necessary. Her voice remained calm, measured. People listened. Word traveled faster than she expected. Back at the camp, things unraveled quietly. Not dramatically. No confrontations, just consequences arriving without announcement, reassignments, evaluations revisited, careers nudged sideways. Claire heard about it in fragments secondhand. She didn't ask for details. Justice didn't need an audience. Weeks later, she returned to the camp not as a trainee but as an observer. The air felt different, heavier. People stood straighter when she passed. Some avoided her entirely. Others watched her with something close to awe. Claire felt neither satisfaction nor resentment, just distance. She walked the familiar paths, boots crunching over gravel she once crossed under laughter and scorn. The memories surfaced uninvited. She let them. Avoiding them only gave them power. In a closed meeting, she presented revisions to their training doctrine. No accusations, no references to the past, just clear, surgical adjustments based on observed failures. The officers listened closely now, pens scratching, faces intent. When she finished, no one spoke for a moment. Then someone cleared their throat. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Claire considered the question carefully. "I did." Silence followed. Afterward, she stood alone outside the briefing room, the sun low and red on the horizon. For the first time since arriving, her shoulders eased fully, not because she'd been vindicated, because she'd been heard. Her husband arrived without warning that evening. No uniform, no rank displayed, just a familiar presence cutting through the noise of the camp like a steady signal. He didn't say much. Never did. He didn't need to. They sat together on the tailgate of a truck, watching the sky fade. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, then paused, getting there. He smiled, small, knowing, reached for her hand. His thumb brushed her wrist, gentle, careful. He didn't ask about the scars, he never had. Later, as they walked away together, Claire felt something loosen inside her chest. Not everything healed at once. Healing wasn't linear, but it happened, slowly, in moments like this. Months passed. Claire took on a new role, one that kept her moving between bases, between teams. She trained soldiers who didn't know her history and didn't need to. She focused on the work, on preparation, on giving people tools instead of legends. Sometimes someone noticed the numbers. Sometimes they didn't. Once a young trainee asked her what they meant. Claire thought for a long time before answering. "They're a reminder," she said finally, "of what I carry and what I choose not to." The trainee nodded, accepting the answer without pushing. Claire appreciated that. On her last visit to the old camp, she walked alone through the training grounds at dusk. The place felt quieter now, changed, or maybe she was. She stopped where she'd once hit the ground during that trust drill. The memory surfaced, the impact, the laughter, the breath knocked from her chest. She stood there for a moment, letting it exist without resistance. Then she turned away. As she left, she didn't look back. Because dignity didn't need witnesses. It only needed resolve. Why did coming back feel harder than leaving ever had? The assignment that followed wasn't announced with ceremony. No speeches, no press, just a quiet directive delivered through channels she trusted. A mission advisory role, short notice, limited visibility, the kind of work that didn't tolerate hesitation or ego. Claire accepted without comment, packed what she needed, and left before anyone could decide how to feel about it. The flight was long and restless. She watched the cabin lights dim and thought about the strange weight of being known without being understood. Recognition had never brought peace. It only changed the shape of the silence around her. The forward sight sat on the edge of unforgiving terrain, mountains that swallowed sound, valleys that held it. The team assigned to her was competent, experienced, and wary, not hostile, just cautious. They'd read her file, or parts of it, enough to know she wasn't there by accident. In the first briefing, she stood at the side of the room, listening more than speaking, letting them talk, letting patterns emerge. When she finally pointed out a flaw in their approach, she did it gently, without ownership, framed it as a question. "What happens if the wind shifts here?" The room went quiet. Someone adjusted the map. Another frowned, recalculating. No laughter this time, just thought. Later, one of the operators approached her privately, older, scarred in ways that didn't show on skin. "You don't push," he said, not accusing, curious. "I don't need to," Claire replied. That night she sat alone outside the temporary quarters, watching the stars burn cold and sharp above the mountains. The air smelled like dust and metal. It reminded her of another place, another night. She pressed her wrist into her sleeve unconsciously, grounding herself. Sleep came hard. The mission simulation ran long and tense, timelines compressed, variables stacked. A decision point emerged where doctrine suggested one move, instinct another. Claire watched the team wrestle with it, tension thickening with every second. "Hold," she said finally, soft, firm. They did. Seconds later, the scenario shifted. A simulated threat revealed itself exactly where she'd predicted. The room exhaled as one. Afterward, no one questioned her authority. That unsettled her more than resistance ever had. In the days that followed, she noticed something subtle but persistent. People deferred to her instinctively, asked before acting, waited for her nod. Claire corrected it gently each time, redirecting credit, encouraging independence. She'd seen what happened when people stopped thinking for themselves. Leadership, she believed, wasn't about being followed. It was about leaving people stronger than you found them. Between drills, she received word from the old camp, an internal review, policy changes, new safeguards around training conduct, names she recognized attached to corrective actions, some relieved, some bitter, none surprised. Claire closed the message without comment. On the fourth night, the mission scenario escalated unexpectedly. A simulated casualty, conflicting intel, comms degradation, the kind of chaos that stripped people down to reflex and truth. Claire moved instinctively, voice steady, eyes scanning, mind calculating 3 steps ahead. She guided without commanding, corrected without shamming. The team adapted, survived. When it ended, someone laughed shakily. Another sat down hard, head in hands. Relief flooded the room. Claire stepped outside alone. Her hands trembled then, just slightly. Adrenaline bleeding off, memory pressing in where focus had been. She breathed through it, slow and controlled, until the shaking stopped. She hated this part, the aftermath, when success left too much room to remember what failure had cost before. A message waited on her secure device, from someone she hadn't heard from in years, a name tied to a chapter she'd sealed away carefully. It was short. "I heard you're still standing." She stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "So are you." They didn't continue the exchange. They didn't need to. Some connections didn't require maintenance. They just existed, quiet and enduring. The final evaluation came at dawn. The team gathered, faces drawn but focused. Claire stood apart, arms folded loosely, watching them prepare. She felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Pride. Not in herself. In them. They executed cleanly, adapted when plans broke, protected each other without hesitation. When it ended, the lead evaluator nodded once, satisfied. "You changed how they think," he said to Claire afterward. She shook her head. "They did that themselves." He studied her, then smiled faintly. "You don't give yourself much credit." She met his gaze evenly. "Credit isn't why I'm here." As the site packed down, Claire prepared to leave again. Another transition, another quiet exit. She preferred it that way. But as she slung her bag over her shoulder, the team gathered nearby, awkward, unsure. Finally, the older operator stepped forward. "We didn't say it before," he said, "but thank you." Claire nodded, that was all. On the flight out, she rested her head back and closed her eyes. The hum of the engines blurred into something almost soothing. For the first time in a long while, she didn't replay old moments on repeat, didn't brace for the next impact. She thought about the numbers on her wrist, about what they'd meant once, about what they meant now. Strength, she realized, wasn't surviving the fall. It was choosing what to carry forward and what to finally let go. Why did the quiet feel heavier now that no one was questioning her place? The return home should have felt like rest, familiar roads, familiar routines, a rhythm she once longed for in the spaces between deployments. But Claire found herself restless, waking before dawn without knowing why, standing at the window as light crept across the horizon, her reflection faint against the glass. There was no immediate threat, no orders pending, and yet her body stayed alert like it was waiting for something it couldn't name. She spent the first week reorganizing things that didn't need it. Gear already clean, notes already filed. Her husband watched her with quiet understanding, never interrupting, never asking her to slow down. He knew better than most that stillness could be louder than chaos. One evening, as they ate in near silence, he finally spoke. "You don't have to keep proving it," he said gently. She paused, fork hovering midair. "Proving what?" "That you belong." Claire set the fork down. The words settled into her chest slowly, finding places she hadn't realized were still tender. She wanted to say she wasn't proving anything anymore, that she'd moved past that, but the truth was more complicated. Belonging wasn't a switch you flipped. It was something you relearned. A request came 2 days later. Not a mission, not an assignment, an invitation, a closed-door review panel, oversight, policy, the unglamorous machinery behind decisions that shaped lives quietly and permanently. Claire hesitated before accepting. This was different, less movement, more exposure. But impact came in many forms. The room was small, neutral, the kind of place designed to strip emotion from conversation. Faces around the table were attentive but guarded. They knew her record, knew her reputation. Some admired it, some resented it. They asked about training culture, about thresholds, about how pressure crossed into harm. Claire answered carefully. She didn't dramatize, didn't accuse. She spoke about systems, incentives, silence, about how capability was often mistaken for volume, how resilience was measured wrong. Someone pushed back. "Pressure builds toughness." "Pressure reveals it," Claire replied, "but it also breaks people who never needed breaking." The room went quiet. Afterward, a woman approached her in the hallway, younger, sharp-eyed. "I didn't think anyone would say it like that," she admitted. "Like what?" "Without making it personal." Claire nodded. "It's always personal. That doesn't mean it has to be about blame." That night she dreamed again, not of missions, of the camp, the laughter, the moment her wrist had been exposed. She woke with her heart racing, fingers curled tightly against the sheets. It took several breaths before she unclenched them. Healing, she reminded herself, wasn't a straight line. The messages started coming in quietly after that. Not requests for interviews or recognition. Questions from instructors, commanders, even trainees. People who'd heard fragments of her story and wanted guidance, not answers. She responded to some, ignored others, chose carefully where to place her energy. One message stopped her. A name she hadn't seen in years. Someone who'd stood in that camp. Someone who hadn't laughed, but hadn't intervened either. "I owe you an apology," it read. "I didn't stop them, I should have." Claire stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back, "I know. Nothing more." Forgiveness, she'd learned, wasn't about absolution. It was about releasing weight you didn't need to carry anymore. A month later, she was asked to speak to a small group of new recruits. Not a lecture, a conversation. She almost declined. Standing in front of people still made her uneasy in ways combat never had, but something in her said yes. She didn't tell them her story. She asked theirs. Listened as they spoke about fear, about doubt, about feeling invisible or underestimated. Claire recognized herself in pieces of each voice. When they asked how she'd handled it, she answered honestly. "I didn't always handle it well," she said. "I just kept going." Afterward, one young woman lingered. "They don't take me seriously," she said quietly. Claire met her eyes. "They don't have to, you do." The words stayed with the recruit. Claire could tell. She hoped they'd surface again when needed. Later, walking back to her quarters, Claire felt something unexpected settle in her chest. Not closure, something gentler. Purpose. The numbers on her wrist had once been anchors to pain, proof of survival, markers of cost. Now they felt like chapters instead of chains. She traced them absent-mindedly, not with regret but with acknowledgement. She hadn't erased her past. She integrated it. On a quiet afternoon, she and her husband took a long walk along a trail overlooking open land. The wind moved through the grass in waves. No gunfire, no commands, just space. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked. She considered it, sometimes. "And then I think about the people who don't get the choice." He nodded. That was answer enough. As the sun dipped low, Claire felt the familiar pull of readiness ease just a fraction. She knew it would never disappear completely. Some things stayed with you, but they didn't have to rule you. That night she wrote in her notebook again. Not maps, not tactics, reflections. Lessons learned the hard way. She didn't know who would read them or if anyone ever would. But she wrote anyway. Because sometimes, resilience wasn't about standing alone anymore. It was about leaving something behind that made the ground steadier for whoever came next. Why did the end arrive so quietly, when everything she'd survived had been so loud? The message came at dawn, not urgent, not dramatic, just a single line delivered through a channel she trusted. "Final review complete. Your role is concluded." Claire read it twice, then set the device down on the table. Outside, the sky was pale and undecided, hovering between night and morning. For years, endings had always arrived with noise, helicopters, orders, timelines collapsing into seconds. This one arrived like a breath slowly released. She didn't feel relief right away. She felt empty. The kind of emptiness that came when something meaningful ended, without asking whether you were ready to let it go. She spent that morning doing ordinary things, folding laundry, cleaning a mug that was already clean, standing in the doorway longer than necessary, watching the world move without her. Her husband noticed, of course. He always did, but he didn't interrupt. He knew this part too. By afternoon, she found herself at the range. It wasn't assigned. No one had asked her to be there. The place was nearly empty, the air still, targets hanging motionless in the distance. Claire set up slowly, deliberately, each movement familiar enough to be almost meditative. She didn't rush the shots. She never had. Each breath settled her deeper into herself. The recoil grounded her. The echo faded into silence that felt earned. When she finished, she cleared the weapon and stood there for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the bench. She realized then that she wasn't proving anything. She was remembering who she was without resistance pushing back. That evening, a small gathering took place in a nondescript room, not a ceremony, not quite a farewell. A handful of people who'd worked alongside her in different seasons of her life. No speeches prepared, no ranks emphasized, just presence. Someone raised a glass awkwardly. "You change things," they said, even when people didn't want them changed. Claire shook her head slightly. Things were already changing. I just didn't step out of the way. A few smiles followed, honest ones. Later, alone again, she opened her notebook to the first page she'd ever written in it. The handwriting was tighter then, more guarded, notes about terrain, variables, threats, survival. She flipped toward the back. The writing softened as the pages turned. Reflections replaced coordinates. Questions replaced answers. Somewhere along the way, without noticing, she'd begun writing for herself instead of against something. Her fingers brushed her wrist. The numbers were still there. For a long time they had been everything. A ledger carved into skin, 43 confirmed kills, 12 lives pulled back from the edge, 4 missions that rewired her nervous system forever, 1 forgiveness she hadn't thought possible. They had anchored her when she might have drifted apart. But now they felt so complete. The next morning she returned to the old camp one final time, not officially, not announced, just passing through on her own terms. The place was quieter than she remembered. New faces, new routines. The ground looked the same, but she could tell it was. Neither was she. She walked past the range where laughter had once cut sharper than gunfire, past the clearing where she'd hit the ground and stood back up without an audience. She stopped where she'd once sat alone, sharpening a pencil while the world tried to decide what to make of her. She smiled just barely. A young soldier passed by, hesitated, then stopped. "Ma'am," they said, "are you Claire Evans?" She nodded. The soldier swallowed. "They talk about you." Claire waited. "Not like a legend," they added quickly, "more like a reminder." Claire felt something warm move through her chest, unexpected, gentle, a reminder of what? "That quiet doesn't mean weak," the soldier said. "That staying doesn't mean losing." Claire held their gaze for a moment, then nodded. "That's a good thing to remember." As she turned to leave, the soldier added, "Thank you." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. On the drive home, the road stretched open and unhurried. Claire rested her hand out the window, letting the wind press against her palm. She thought about all the versions of herself that had existed along the way, the one who'd been ignored, the one who'd endured, the one who'd carried too much without complaint. They all felt close now, integrated, at peace with each other. That night she sat with her husband on the porch as the stars came out one by one. No phones, no interruptions, just the quiet hum of insects and distant wind. "You're different," he said softly. She considered it. "I'm lighter." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Before going inside, Claire went to her desk and opened the small drawer where she kept her tools. She removed a thin band of fabric, worn, familiar, the glove she'd used for years to cover her wrist. She set it down. Then, carefully, deliberately, she rolled up her sleeve and looked at the scars one last time as something she needed to hide. She didn't feel exposed. She felt finished. The numbers hadn't defined her. They recorded her. And now she was free to move forward without counting. Claire Evans never stood on a stage to reclaim her dignity. She never demanded recognition from those who doubted her. She never raised her voice to prove her strength. She lived it. Quietly, consistently, without spectacle. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And the room eventually learns how to listen.